control now. That
Done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, sorry, all about bridging reality, aspiration to reality. So how do we bring systems innovation approaches into the public sector? In the first session today, like I said, you hear from Maureen, who'll provide a case study on her work with the Scottish government, and then Diego on his work with the Canadian government. I am in Australia, in Canberra. I'm currently working to introduce some systems approaches in the aged care sector, specifically aged care reform. And excited to have you here. I'll hand over to Martin quickly to give a bit of an introduction, and then Marielle, and then we'll kick into the icebreaker.
Very good. Thank you. And Isaac, just so that people are aware, what time is it where you are now?
It's just gone 10 p.m.
Wow.
So
on Friday night. Yes. Respect.
I'm committed.
Yes. So hi, everybody. I'm Martin Lins Fitzgerald. I'm calling in from Amsterdam. I'm very Dutch, but have an American accent. That's due to my wife, a long other story. So I work on innovation in the Dutch government, currently still at the Social Security Bank, which provides all pensions and other things. And soon for the municipality of Amsterdam. Having a lot of fun. And one of the things that I learned working in the government the last 2 years, because I'm very young, really, is that, really the only way to solve the complex issues is to understand complexity and figure out maybe that systems innovation is a way to go. So that's why I'm here. That's why I help always in these sessions, and I'm part of the hub.
Great. And that's a good cue for me to come in. My name is Marielle Julin. I'm also one of the hosts here. I'm an economist by training, and currently I'm leading a big program to increase innovation in the public sector in Sweden, with the aim, of course, of achieving the Agenda 2030 objectives and using systems innovation and systems approaches to reach those objectives. So I have a long experience of working with the public sector over many years, and trying to get as much impact as possible for the money, speaking as an economist. So it's really great to be able to contribute to our community here, and also try to facilitate sharing of good examples of practical implementation, because I think there's a real appetite for that in the systems innovation community. I think we cannot hear enough about good examples, and we're very, very pleased to have these two eminent speakers with us today. And hand over to Isaac for the icebreaker, where we will hear from you all.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Marielle. Thanks, Martin. We're just going to kick off on a bit of a warm-up icebreaker, just to check a couple of things. One, that you're awake. Secondly, where you're from. And thirdly, if you can access and use Miro. So the link to the Miro board should be in the chat. If it's not, please do let us know. But there seems to be quite a few people jumping in, so it seems to be working. Now, if you come to the frame that I'm on now, it says warm up icebreaker. That's a good hint. You're already all over it. Fantastic. Grab the dot that corresponds to the mood and energy level that you are in, and place it where you are in the world.
Nice. South America. Oh, we have somebody from Canada.
Good spread.
That could be our speaker, Diego.
That could be. Really?
Surprise.
with the soon to come two kids in the background kind of thing.
Yes. Mine will be there too.
The territory.
South America. Excellent.
Where's Asia?
Western Europeans.
People from the US are still blinded by the eclipse, I guess.
The eclipse. No New Zealanders, unfortunately. Oh, Tasmania is not even on the map. That's a bit disappointing. That is a state
It
of
fell
Australia
off.
for those that aren't aware.
I'm the only one with the low energy and the low mood. But you know, that's fine. I'm feeling better
People-
already. By the time we're done, I will have moved.
You piped up. Excellent. All right. Looks like the dots are slowing drastically. Now shift over here with me to the next frame on the right-hand side. Come on, arrows. That's it. The next question, what's your level of experience in applying systems innovation in the public sector? So in the top right-hand quadrant, so the high X and Y would be you're a system ninja and you run the public sector. And the opposite is true for the bottom left quadrant.
To use a system like this, it requires a certain degree of technical dexterity, and its generation. Okay, I try to run these Myros in other contexts, and sometimes it works well, sometimes it's just
Yeah, if people want to use chat for anything, like Christopher, feel free to just put your messages in the chat. Ah, and you were,
Lovely.
were in
Look at
DC.
It's almost linear. That's fantastic. Who would have picked that? That's a good spread, a really good spread, in fact. Excellent. Thank you for diving into that. We've clearly shown we can use Miro. Or if you can't access Miro, please do, drop it in the chat in Zoom, and we'll drop it onto the board on your behalf. Without further ado, I will introduce our speakers. They're going to provide a 15 to 20 minute presentation on a case study where they've applied systems innovation techniques and tools in their own settings. After which we're going to have a chance to ask some questions of our speakers. So please do note down any questions you might have, anything you might follow up, and we will have a significant amount of time to put those questions to them after this session. So first up, I'd like to ask Diego, if you could wow us with your presentation, please. And I'll stop the share, Diego, so if you do want to share anything.
No, I guess I'm just going to be talking and trying to engage with everybody. How much time we have for this particular segment?
20 minutes.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you very much, and greetings, everyone, wherever you are. My desire was to share with you the social and the human perspective of how we can get complexity thinking into public sector elements and how to implement them in the framework that is related to the policy that we're handling here. I'm coming to you from the perspective of someone who has been working on systems, who has been working on complexity, but at the same time, who has been a bureaucrat. And I've been a bureaucrat at every layer, both with international organizations and with the Canadian government. So I kind of have a little bit of a comparative perspective on that. And the case that I wanted to use was a very recent case, something that is very likely to have a happy ending, I think. And it's a case about how to integrate complexity thinking into the new way of measuring rural mobility in Canada. Canada is one of the largest countries in the world. And when we talk rural, we talk huge distances. So there are a few things there. First, there's not necessarily a lot of data. Second, we have to deal with several layers of interaction between different levels of government. We have the federal, we have the provincial, we have the municipalities, and in some cases we also have the First Nations interactors. So you have many, many layers of how to convince, and then how to create some new thinking about rural mobility in a context in which, to start with, we don't have necessarily a lot of data. and the methods and the applications that come from complexity are not necessarily the core or the current framework that is used for this analysis. So not only you had to convince in terms of where to go, but what to do and how to do it. And so there were three different layers of engagement that were quite important in this case. I'm referring to a situation in which we had the opportunity to engage with the Central Statistics Office in Canada. There has been already some engagement in trying to measure rural mobility from different angles. And that was an opportunity to say, well, why don't we just do that for certain areas of Canada, rural areas, but let's also come up with new ways of bringing this methodology. And that was the part that was a little bit of a outside the curve and not necessarily familiar. So there was a lot of engagement in terms of discussions. And out of this whole process, there are a few things that had emerged as key and central for this. Let me just start with what is the what. The what is that we will be measuring, and we will try to use indicators on rural mobility, trying to capture data from all the sources that we have available in terms of transportation flows, mobility of people going from one place to the other. Information that emerges from the first round of engagement through a rural transportation trust fund. So we gave money to different people, and out of that, people start developing their own local solutions. And we will try to have that set of data in a way that is not just going to reflect linear connections, that is, people with one mode of transportation, where they come from, but trying to see how much of that data is going to help us develop a network picture, a systems picture. And in that, we will also try to complement that with new concepts. Some of them are emerging in mostly from urban settings, such as something that is being presented recently by some colleagues at the University of Utrecht, transportation poverty. So how you're able to extract measurements on transportation poverty, that is the ability of people to have access to a decent level and equal level of mobility in comparison to other people inside your own community or inside the country. How can you do that when you don't have a lot of data? On the linear element, it was basically going to be, let's just figure out what's happening at the rural fountains. But when we introduced the whole idea of having transportation poverty, things got a little bit complicated. Where's the concept coming from? What are the implications? And then we had the whole idea of saying, well, let's also do it with the idea of trying to build a network. And in the network, once we have the network, we can use adaptive complexity, we can use complexity systems, we can use network theory, and let's try to find those hidden synergies, those hidden gems that happen to be in the system. There might be correlations, there might be connections, there might be things that happen between one actor and the other, or different actors, that suggest that there might be a most efficient way of engaging. The concept as such did not meet a lot of resistance. However, when it became important to try to establish this into the normal framework of approval, then we had some issues. And that's one of the things that I think is extremely important at this point, because trying to look into the whole issue of building a case in a normal bureaucratic process, bringing new measures and potentially new outputs is quite a task. And so that's what we try to do here, trying to basically meet the parameters of what is the usual process in my bureaucracy, as many others, which is you have an idea, you submit it to approval, you measure the pros, the cons, you discuss it, you consult, you get to one draft, then you go to the second, you get comments, and then finally submit it for approval. And then after certain layers of discussion, the thing is approved, budget is granted, and then you get to the implementation. But when I say budget is granted, it means that we have already created a mechanism by which we say, by X amount of dollars that we're going to expend, we're going to have X amount of results. So it's in itself a process that is very linear and very causality related. $1 here, how many outputs here? And that is an equation that is very difficult to walk away, because the whole idea of accountability and due diligence and all these elements of public sector commitments need to be there, need to be met. So how can you convince decision makers when you have to take, for instance, $1 and you are engaging not on having $1 one result, but $1 three potential outcomes, even in the case of an adaptive complexity. How are we going to spend $1 and have a measure that is not necessarily quantifiable as we're used to? How can we just get to that point? Those are the things that we're basically facing here. And the project basically is at the point in which it has been approved and we're going to get into implementation. So the four things I wanted to mention in this particular case was the issue of accountability. For instance, in public policy, the customary mechanism of accountability is on straightforward metrics and clear-cut case and effect. They don't hold well when we're dealing with complex systems. So the whole idea is, how can we come up with accountability structures that are reformed to better represent widespread consequences and the more dispersed nature of policy action? How can we create accountability when the results are going to be measures that are difficult to measure, or measures that are not necessarily quantifiable but quantitative? And in that regard, you have some sort of concepts that would be difficult to put back into result-based systems or a theory of change, as is understood by most of my colleagues. Accepting the concept of complexity and that is going to yield different elements is in itself a process. And that is something that has been integrated. Step number one, in the project, we will have a workshop in which we're going to invite colleagues from this community of thought, and we will be trying to adapt those principles and those concepts to the idea of to the data that is going to emerge out of the measurements that we have. The second element is that we will accept the fact that there is an adaptive element here that is not going to be a result-based management as such in the way we understood it normally. The second element is on policy planning, because when we call for a policy planning and we take on elements such as transportation poverty, we have a measure that indicates a gap, a socioeconomic missing something, a measure that is not necessarily easy to pinpoint on an ocean of data, or rather the desert in some cases, but that at the same time it has been created and defined in urban context, how we can transpose that into a rural setting. One of the things that emerge of this is that we have to be able to create an evolving information and circumstances that underscores the value. You cannot have this kind of concepts unless you have a principle that you're trying to aim at. If you want to build policy on the basis of defining that rural transportation is to be the ability for people to move from A to B, then transportation poverty doesn't match. But if you create something in terms of rural transportation, it is something that needs to meet certain indicators of dignity or equity, or the ability of people to have the sense that they're part of the same community, basically aiming at something like human dignity, then the measure is valid. And then the measure is completely quantifiable, because once you have the information from the data, you're going to be able to put it into the framework of analysis and policy planning that is required. The third element is measurements. Why measurements? Because usual metrics are typically focused on quantifiable aspects, and they fail to encompass the full array of elements that are shaping rural mobility. For reference, there have been some social issues related to rural mobility. People who don't have a lot of mobility because of lack of access, they don't have a car, have great distances in Canada, are usually exposed, and there has been a correlation between gender violence against specific groups in society and the inability to move in large spaces. So we had major cases with the violence of against First Nations women in the rural extents of Canada. There is something there that needs to be captured, measured, and addressed. And it's a bit difficult to do it if you have more, let's call it narrow defined metrics. So this is important because we are trying to develop measurement tools that embrace both qualitative and quantitative factors, such as community ties and accessibility of services. This is to be accounted for. And in that context, the picture that will emerge out of this network is going to be rather different from the one that we might have at the beginning. The final element here is the whole issue of policy upstreaming, is the ability to incorporate those principles of complexity science and network theory and those insights and move that up the decision-making process. We are all part of this community. We understand the principles, but you will be surprised that not everybody is on board or necessarily aware of the nature of complexity thinking and the public policy developed on the frameworks of complexity. It is novel, or is at least not as familiar to many. And so taking senior decision makers and say, well, this is going to be different in terms of what you're going to get out of the mapping. This is what is going to be different in terms of how we're going to measure it. And this is going to be different in terms of what kind of insights are going to emerge out of the analysis. Takes a little bit of process. But at the same time, by doing it in a way that you are consensual and you build layer by layer, we're being able to do it. One important thing is that the design of policies has to be very much in accordance with rural mobility landscapes and avoiding the pitfalls of trying to retrofit policies that emerge from other countries. Like if we just try to transpose everything we have done on urban settings onto the rural settings, we're going to have problems in terms of what is to measure, how to target, who to look for, and what are the hubs and what are the discussions we want to aim for. However, this is possible in the case of rural landscaping because we're going to do it in the encompassing and adaptive complexity from the bottom up, taking on what is the practice at the level of communities and trying to create the mapping out of that. The measures will be emerging from both the normal quantitative support and source of streaming that emerge from all the data that has been collected, but also will be complemented by information that emerges out of the communities and from other actors. So we will be able to have, ideally, a picture in which we will try to have those two elements, quantitative and qualitative, how to integrate them and how to merge them and provide a full picture of rural mobility is the next step of this engagement. But we hope that with the support of community of practice and experts, as well as the willingness of those decision makers that have granted us the ability to move forward with this might yield an interesting picture about rural mobility, something that is reflected not in terms of how many, but also how well and how people feel about it. And I would just complete, I don't know how much time I have left at this point, as I said.
There's about 4 minutes, Diego.
Okay.
Not exactly 4 minutes, let's just say.
4 minutes. Okay, so basically, one of the last things we wanted to mention is that by rethinking accountability, policy planning, measurement, and policy streaming, this initiative has the potential to lay the groundwork for more nuanced, effective, and flexible public policy processes. And this is something that we are being chasing. And I, as a public servant and as a scholar and as a professor of practice and as many other things, I'm extremely committed to the idea that our policy process needs to deliver better, faster, and need to learn better from the systems. And we have very Cartesian, very the word we always use is reductionist, linear thinking in terms of how we approach public policy. And this is not necessarily the kind of tools and the kind of approach that was going to help us to face the challenges that we're facing now. I work in infrastructure. I used to work in the Department of Foreign Affairs, with the Department of Defense. For instance, climate change is one thing that requires a niftiness in terms of ability to respond that cannot emerge out of the policy process that we have in place. So at this point, it will be very important to be able to see, and hopefully this will be one test of how this kind of thinking can help us shape policy development based on a more comprehensive way of understanding the data and using this thinking to be able to get more out of the data than what emerges currently if we just do linear processes. So the data is the music. I hope we can get that song out of it. I will be more than happy to keep you posted on how this program evolves. But more importantly, I think this is in itself an interesting innovation. It's the fact that we are able to introduce these concepts into the thinking And with this, we're going to be able, hopefully, to be able to have a more complete picture of what rural mobility is all. And it will be shaped by complexity, network thinking, systems thinking, and the whole idea that is about creating processes that reflect needs, not necessarily processes that meet the standards of what we call in our system treasury board submissions, which is extremely important. Is the first step number one, but needs to be complemented by the human dimension as well. So I complete with this, and happy to take on questions and carry on with the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Diego. There's a lot to take in there. Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how it goes, but I think you've done well even to get it through the approval processes to this point. I think that's no mean feat. So, I can see there's already a host of questions there. Please do keep adding some questions there. Our intent there is to try and group them up to get as many questions answered as we can during the Q&A session after the break. So add them in there. We'll jump to Maureen at this point. Maureen will, well, Martin's. Do you have a question?
Yes,
Martin,
yes. Well, one point, as I will be managing the Q&A part, maybe it's an idea for people just to take 1 minute or less, if we can, and think about the questions that you will be forgetting once that Marianne will start going, because that will be such a loss. So take a minute and yeah, write up. You can see that in the Miro board, as many stickies as you have, because yeah, let's capture it before it dissipates again.
Good point. Good point.
And if you can't access Miro, please use the chat and I'll put it in for you. This is the part where the little band starts the background music.
And Isaac, you want me to answer? You want me to answer now or at the end?
Yeah, we'll at the end. Yeah, we'll come back to it shortly. Thanks, Diego. The people typing away, so we'll give it a little bit there. Yeah, a couple of, I guess, points to note just to fill this moment here. The accountability and evaluation piece really resonated with me. That idea of how do we work within the accountability frameworks that exist, and that requirement with these new concepts. So yeah, intrigued to see where it goes from here. And the idea of warm data that Martin introduced me to recently sort of springs to mind when you're talking about combining the qualitative and quantitative elements.
Starting my course on April 15th with Nora Bateson. Looking forward to it.
Can you hear how it goes? All right. Please do keep adding some notes there as we kick off into the next speaker, but also as questions come up while Maureen is providing her presentation, please add them into the Miro board or the chat and we'll drop them in the Miro board. So Maureen, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Isaac, and been faffing with all of my screens and unmute and get my notes in front of me and can I just check you've got my slides showing okay? Great. So hopefully that's not going to be death by PowerPoint. It was quite refreshing to hear Diego free flowing like that. Kind of like it. And I don't know if I'm an eminent speaker. I don't know about that. Hopefully that's going to be engaging enough for everyone. So I'm Maureen. I head up the policy programs and partnerships at the Royal Academy of Engineering. It's been about 5 years or so that I've started working on, using systems approaches and worked at the Academy to develop and fine-tune some ways to help public institutions use systems thinking, system methodology, and I distinguish both. And mostly I've been working mostly at the policy development, policy design stage, and a lot with more the central government or devolved administration, as we have in the UK. We have Scotland, particularly in Wales, Northern Ireland, and sort of operate like a mini central government, but there's a specific connection there. Less so on the policy delivery, so the engagement with all of the delivery partners and other institutions that come together. But hopefully the example today will still be relevant. So I'm going to so just a little bit about the academy, for those who would wonder what are the engineers doing in all this. So just to say, the academy is a national academy for engineering. There are those in various countries, including in Sweden or in Canada. And we are a charity. We're not government. So we have a charitable mission. And the way I'm going to talk about this is as a practitioner, as a friend to public teams, and when they do want to do something, some of them come to us to help. And because we are representing the best engineers in the UK, a lot of the time, kind of intervention that we're going to do focus in policy areas where there is a strong technical angle. So stuff like decarbonization, or anything to do with infrastructures, whether they are physical, like transport, or digital, or anything that's got some very strong technology angle, such as supply chains and resilience and critical capabilities and things like that. But occasionally we also have things that come our way that are a bit on the softer side, on the more social side, so the social side of policy and challenges. And that's really interesting because we noticed that the engineering mindset also works in there. I'm just going to quickly mention, because the logo is up there on my slide deck, National Engineering Policy Center, just to say, so we do work a lot in partnership with lots of organizations. This is a National Engineering Policy Center where we work with other engineering institutions in the UK in particular, but just to say that we are looking to expand our pool of partners, particularly looking at partnering with systems thinking specialists or organizations. So I just wanted to mention it today. This is the kind of work that my team does. We have programs to help government access system support. We have a policy fellowship that's more for individuals, and we also receive a lot of requests for support, as I mentioned. And in that case, we deploy an array of methodologies, and often case it's a workshop, but also sometimes it's a bigger commission. So for us, really, when we're being asked to help with something, and I'll take you onto the case study in a minute, we definitely do our best. It's a very bespoke process. And we always have at heart to also work on the mindset and the capability building. As Diego mentioned, and as many of you know, it's not yet very well established system thinking, and it's really hard to do in a context of a classic policy development, and therefore, we need to win the hearts and minds of people when we get in there. We also need to help those who have been won over in government teams, just to keep that life going, to convince others, to build their ability to do the work and to work with others. So a lot of the work that we do in our programs is quite pragmatic. We want to work with policy professionals, policy makers who want to do stuff now, and therefore we are very pragmatic and not too precious about terminology, not too precious about whether we are a pure systems thinker, whether we are the state of the art of systems innovation. We just work with the people who want to do it right now. And these are the kind of resources that we've used, and some of them developed. So the first on the left is work that we've done under the banner of Engineering Better Care a few years back, was to develop the user systems thinking to apply to improvement in the health and care sector. And there's a whole toolkit that has been developed with the University of Cambridge. And I've put the link in the slides, which we can share after. This is a framework that we use a lot. Quite simple, quite very accessible. In the middle, there is the toolkit that has been created by the Government Office for Science in the UK. So that's been, obviously, it's not our doing, but we've helped a lot inputted into it. It's not a perfect toolkit. There's a lot that we would do differently if we could, but we've worked very closely with teams internally to develop this, and we thought it's a good start. At least there is a toolkit official in the UK government for this. And then just briefly mentioning the publication to the right. So we have a policy fellowship at the Academy who takes civil servants through a program to help them connect with engineers and system thinker. And we've got about 70 of them since the last 5 years. And last year we brought together 25 of them into a workshop for them to tell us what they think is good about system thinking, what's important to think about when you try to do it in government. And that resulted in a bit of a pamphlet. It's not a technical publication, it's more like an inspiration piece. So I just want to share that. So now moving on to the case study itself. So a few years ago, 3 years ago now, we were approached by the Scottish government and to work on this decarbonizing heat in buildings. So it's a subset of the decarbonization net zero challenge. And it's a small scale system innovation sample, I suppose. Compared to what Diego's just presented, certainly it's the more the number of stakeholders engaged was very limited. It's more like you could call it. It's not the full scale exercise. It's the demo. It's the let's try it internally, see how it works, get some early insight, go out to decision makers and see whether we can unlock support for the bigger scale intervention. So it was a bit of a stage approach, but it's still quite interesting to see the thought process of the government team that was behind this. And they were really, really determined to just try and do the job properly, explore the landscape and see how to make the most of it. And it's also, I'm going to present on the point of view of a practitioner as opposed to the actual client organization, the customer, the insider of government. So there will be things sort of skew a little bit my presentation here, but you can see here this is the problem. This is the objective for the government, the Scottish government for heat in building. They have a strategy they've been written about this, and they have a number of targets. They are enshrined in law, so it's a bit like for the UK government. We have, it's a parliament bill that's been passed to determine the net zero target. So it's like there's no negotiation about it, although they're behind, obviously. But in Scotland they have a much more stringent target, even. And this is how the government team, the heat in building strategy team, sort of came to us. This is the exam question. So they came to us and say, well, we know we need to decarbonize. We know we have our targets. But for us, the exam question is, how do we do that given the complexity of the context? Because we are one team amongst many other government teams doing lots of different stuff lots of silos, obviously, unsurprisingly. We know that whatever we're going to do will not be we're not able to take that big system view. We cannot do that. It just it's not going to be viable for us here. And so what do we do? How do we make this tractable? And a lot of the work that we've done, we did a lot of very lengthy, even scoping process, lots of discussions with lots of different team members in order to just define the boundary of the problem that we could actually start to tackle, given the control that they had and the timeline that they had, and the context that they had. So this is just a bit of a framing for the work that we did with them, and I want to go in more detail now. But to say that, I think it's really important to have that trusted relationship, to be able to have those early discussion and take the time in order to define what is it that you can and can't do to start with, because managing expectation is important. You cannot, it's really bad to fail to achieve those at the end. So we did 2 workshops, and we had these objectives. It did boil down all of that complexity of the context, the different types of infrastructure, different level of regulation, etc. It actually, the achieving the target of decarbonizing buildings, heat in buildings, is basically, it boils down to people changing the boilers at one point, right? So anything, actually, if you boil it down, this is actually what's going to make or break, the achieving the target. What do people do when they need to change their boiler? Say when the boiler breaks down, and people now know that at one point they will need to change the system to something that's net zero compliant. Or what happens if at one point there is a regulation that says you cannot not have a heat pump, so you cannot not, it's finished, you have to move to the new system. And so we based on this discussion and this realization, we decided to do 2 workshops that would lead to understand the impact of any regulation for those key stakeholder group, the building owners, and identify the risks and the unintended consequence that could be associated to any rollout of a regulation about this, and then what to do about it. So that was a kind of objectives, and running underneath that also to make sure that whatever we do, it would equip the team with some tools and some experience that they could reuse in the future, because we would be there for 2 workshops, and then that's that. Then they're on their own. And also for them to understand that what we're doing with them is, has got some limitations, and has got benefits, but also limitations. We left them with some output, so and there was some impact. I'll return to that after. So the first workshops, this is how we break down the workshops. It was really important to have, the importance with workshop is to have the right people in the room. So we spent a lot of time understanding who should be in the room. We had the policy team, we had the public engagement teams who are responsible for the kind of messaging that goes out down the line. And we also brought some experts, experts in building heat decarbonizations, experts in public engagement, and all of those groups did the 2 workshops. And the first workshop, we explored the stakeholder needs. What do people really need? And the kind of narratives. And we used a method that's called the persona, that's borrowed from design thinking, but it's quite useful when you can't really access yet the real people out there. You can work with those persona. And we identified the risk. And the second workshop, we went a bit further down in defining what are the narrative that we would want those people to have in any given scenario. What would we want people to do? What would we want them to think? And then to be able from there identify the policy enablers that would enable those success stories to unfold. Personas, for those who maybe are not familiar, they're fictional characters which you create based on quite sort of robust research. It's not just a story. There's a lot of research that goes on to create good personas, and it's in order to represent the full range of the different users types that might interact within the particular system. And when we did that, we created a persona and it helped the participant for workshop to be the person, like to really embody but the public and understand the attitude, behavior, goals, pain points, and then understand their needs, and walk the walk, really understand how the sequence of events will unfold and what people will think and what they will do and what happened next. So we really went very deep into those experiences. So in the first workshop for each persona, we explored their needs. So we use that framework as a, building owner, middle-aged lady with a family and a kid. I need, this is what I need, so that this is my deep down motivation for the need. And this is an exercise that we took from that Engineering Better Care framework. And each, we had this breakout session, and each we had a set of personas for each of them. We went through that process, and it's an iterative process to be able to really understand it. And you can go very, if you have a lot of time, you can do that for a long time, and you still uncover needs and motivation and back, and you can build a good picture of your stakeholders. Then we looked at those narratives and what it told us about where were the risks and the potential failures of the system. So that we can start to think about what we could do about it. So, for instance, one of our stakeholder, perhaps they're not able to replace the boiler because they don't have the money. So they need the money in order to change the boiler, and therefore the risk there is that you could have people falling into what we call fuel poverty, because they cannot afford to heat themselves anymore because of the situation. So this is a bit of a very, very scenario, quite dramatic, but all of those different stories enable to sort of identify those risks. In the second workshop, we started to explore what would be the desired narrative. So instead of saying, this person cannot afford to change their boiler, therefore, we started to think about, okay, what we would want that person to think and to be able to do. We would want them to be cognizant of perhaps funding help that's available so that they're not at risk of falling into fuel poverty. So we were trying to flip the question like that. And this is a bit of a sample of the facilitator prompts that we had for the breakout sessions. And again, we did that for each and every single personas. Once we did that, we captured the insights in this. This is an example, a sample of the mirror board that we had running for the workshop, to try to organize the information under some themes and identify the enablers. It was also quite good to start mapping the complexity of all of the different factors that individuals would need to be considering. So, for instance, if you need to change your heating system and you consider your insurance provision, there might be anxiety around making those large investment choices, or there might be a lack of social norm. Normally you would just go and ask your neighbors, what did you do? But maybe at that point, none of your neighbors have done anything, and therefore you're the first. And how do you actually navigate those elements? It also enabled us to sort of identify some challenges and risk elsewhere. So for instance, the heating installers, they might not yet be skilled to do the installation, but they might not even be skilled to make some to give some advice about choosing. So that sort of gave some insights onto other areas of policy that would need to be looked at. So the skills development or the reskilling of the workforce, for instance, or to perhaps have a look at the insurers and what are the regulations around the insurers. And that's where the system, the systemic elements started to really take shape. So we were not only looking at what happens for the public, for those building owners, but also for the whole landscape of stakeholders that are involved in that system that enables to achieve decarbonization of heat. So to conclude, I'm coming back to this slide. We don't claim that we provided a comprehensive system approach to the whole heat and building challenges, but it was quite a pragmatic, workable approach for a policy team and a wider pool of civil servants to really, take that system approach within their reality, within the timeline that they had, within the resources that they had. It did still produce some impact. I mean, we run an independent evaluation of that workshop, and the impact that you see on screen were the responses that we got from the wider stakeholders that were involved in the workshop. So evaluating and measuring impact on policy is always very difficult, but this we can say it did help. And the team are continuing to reuse those personas, and they have made changes to the way they would have done something different if they hadn't done this workshop, and they think it would not have been as good. So this is my case study for today, and I hope I was interesting, and happy to have questions in the next part of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Marine. Yeah, really appreciate that. I really quite like the complementary nature of the two case studies. I got a lot of different things, but a lot out of both. Diego, question.
Apologies, it was a mistake. I wanted to clap only. Sorry.
It was a rogue hand. I get those all the time. There was a question, Mariana. I believe you put a question in the chat. I'll just drop the response. The links to the tools should be in the slide pack that I've just put in the chat, and there's also the slide pack is on the Miro board as well, so you can get it from either. If you could take maybe a minute or two to drop any questions in the on the board or in the chat that you'd like to ask. We will have a brief 5-minute break, so it'll be 2 minutes past the hour, whatever the hour is in your time zone. That would be 3:03 Central European, I believe. And come back for the Q&A session. Thanks, everyone.
For the people doing the questions, because they can't take a break like I can, and please make sure that you note who the question is for. I kind of have on the bottom part noted my questions for Marine and the top one for Diego, or make it explicit, whatever works for you.
Right, let's grab a coffee or glass of water.
is the only other one here, Iggy. Where are you joining us from?
Buenos Aires.
Ah, welcome. What time is it there?
It's 10 a.m. this time. So it's like
Oh, okay.
the other side of
It's
the
quite
world.
civilized. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm practicing my harmonica. So I'm tuning out.
Is that what that
a little
is?
I was
bit.
wondering what that was. Yeah. How's it coming along?
Just first steps, It's a good exercise for the belly breathing, the diaphragm breathing.
Yeah, it is.
Not sure about the
Yeah.
neighbors though, but I am having fun.
It's fascinating
not
what
like drums.
you can learn at the Governance Hub events. Just saying.
That's
Or bring an instrument.
All
You never
sorts.
know.
It's a very systemic instrument.
Exactly.
It sure is. Not a
Are we all
linear
back
sound. That's for sure.
and ready to
I think
continue?
we've got most people. It is 3 minutes past the hour. I've just admitted another person, so
Fabulous.
let's kick it back off. So without further ado, thanks everyone for sticking in with us. Now we're going to hand over to Martin to run us through a bit of a Q&A session with the panel. So Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. I'm still so impressed that you can do this so late. I'm very bad in the evening, but that's a whole other story again. So since we are only with 16 people in this virtual cyberspace room, let's all open up our mics, unless there are really a lot of annoying kids behind you, which is also good, but kind of distracting. Mine will be in soon and one. But yeah, let's make this informal and a conversation thing. I put up a lot of questions, if you can see them, and Maureen already answered one. Thank you very much. And my idea is just to, so I have a lot of questions because I always have a lot of questions. And of course, that's my role today. But for the rest, I mean, if you want to say something, like I said, keep the mic open. Let's start a live conversation. I've done that a lot in Zoom, and that really is, yeah, because we're all the same. We're all humans. There's nothing, yeah, it makes it very easy to do. And I have actually a first question for Maureen. Let's start with you because you were talking. So Maureen, what did you take away from Diego's story, if you were able to listen?
Yeah, I was listening and I took loads of notes, and I mean, first of all, I would say from Diego's personal perspective, I suppose I'm finding it really interesting and admirable that there is such a systematic, reflective approach, that's been taken on a project, and I'm really hoping that there's opportunity to talk to Diego again or have him back again down the line when his things have evolved. And I was particularly interested in the business case part. I'm very interested in, I mean, I had noted questions about how are you going, first of all, how has it worked so far? Because obviously the project seemed to be off the ground, so the business case has worked to an extent, at least so far. Some of it is, and how did that work? I'm really interested to know more about how the business case has been made so far. And then, because it looked like in a way Diego was explaining that they're still working on it to try and transform or perhaps improve how the business case can be made in the future. So they're learning from this. What will happen in terms of activities? What will happen in order for this question to be developed or addressed? Yeah, is that all right as an answer?
It's already 2 questions for Diego, who's on mute. Yes,
please tell me. I'm sorry, I was doing on the complexity being Sesame Street and complexity thinking here. So I'm sorry. my nanny didn't come, kids are sick, so it's a Murphy's Law. But please tell me again.
Maureen, can you make a
Yeah, I mean,
quick repeat?
Yeah, no, it was a question for you, Diego. Very interested in what you were talking about the business case in particular. And clearly, the business case have somewhat worked already because you were doing a project. You've started. So I was curious to understand how did you do that? And then it seemed to be still a big question, and therefore I was curious to know what is it that you're going to do next on that particular topic.
Right. Okay. Well, one of the things about the business case is that basically is about the fact that every Canadian, and they say this in this way, they say it in Canada, every Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. And by that, they mean basically that every person in the country should have access to what the country is and what the country offers. But obviously, in such a large extent, the person in Toronto has access to mobility services and the fluidity of the entire society that doesn't happen with somebody up in the north on a rural area. So one of the things is that we need to be able to create a minimum measure of accessibility and fluidity so that every Canadian should be at X number of kilometers of a post office, of a grocery store, of the basic amenities of life. And that is certainly not the case. So rural mobility is based on that, the whole thing that infrastructure needs to respond to that element. As I mentioned before, on top of that is that I mentioned that because of transportation poverty was not considered and is something very tangible in that needs to be measured. Once you're able to identify, you will see that some people are poor in transportation terms in a very specific manner. And that means that that needs to have a certain type of measures, additional measures to that. Because mobility for First Nations, rural women in the lower end of the socioeconomic scale is extremely difficult to fathom or to consider. And the socioeconomic consequences of that are there, and we are dealing with them. So certainly we need to have a solution. So in that case, it was clear. It's not going to be the type of business case in which you meet opportunity cost or cost effectiveness. No, this is government at its best. We need to make it happen at a loss. But that is the commitment on the country, basically, to make it happen.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my personal take is always that we have no gravity in government, as in, and with that I say that money has a different meaning. In a way where in the outside world, money brings you down to earth all the time. In government, you might be floating, but you know what? It works. But anyway, that's my view. Okay. Now, Diego, I have a question for you. And I hope you were listening to Maureen's story. Because what inspired you from her approach specifically, or are there things that you'd like to take to your program?
Well, one of the things I saw in Maureen's is that how well structured the entire process is. Just how well structured the process. Well, you might as well see.
Throw them in there. Very good.
There.
And we're sick, right? No.
Yeah. One of the main things that emerged was the fact that in Maureen's case, everything was very well structured and process thinking, outcomes, elements. And that is something that in our case, well, plan and everything, but I'm selling a vision. And I will have, and I hope to have what Maureen has. After we start implementation, we'll have the workshops in which I'm going to bring systems thinkers and complexity folks. even my team of advisors from my own PhD that work on economic complexity, which is a subset of complexity. And I'm going to ask my friends in that area, okay, we're doing economic complexity, let's transpose it onto public sector. I need the measurements and the thinking, such as what can emerge out of the principle of relatedness, for instance, which is the well-known measure in economic complexity, so that we can apply to rural transportation. I mean, we will be doing a bit of development of tools as it stands. And with the workshops, we will prepare the interface to receive the data that we are collecting. The other thing is that, I mean, think of it, is this is a G7 country, it's huge. Adapting the statistical office to a new measure like transportation poverty, which is not unknown. I mean, they're extremely well versed on these whole things, but to make it part of the things to be measured and to be counted in a project is a huge undertaking, just because processes need to be adapted. So how I'm going to be able to do that and get them to integrate this measure into not just my project, but once the data is there for everything else, it would be huge. And if I have the capacity, and I wouldn't talk about first person, if we have the capacity and we have the ability to integrate this, it will be measuring social innovations for the next round we have the census in 10 years time or whatever it's going to be, because it will be capturing things that we don't capture today.
Different type of harvesting. Very interesting. Thank you, Diego. And Isaac, you were saying that you had some insights earlier. I can't remember which part it was, but I'd like to invite you to comment on what inspired you from the two talks.
What inspired me?
Takeaway.
Good question. Well, I was just it was similar to Maureen's question actually. The idea of accountability is hard to get away from in government, and selling new ideas that don't necessarily have a body of evidence behind them is challenging at best in government, particularly when you're asking for a lot of money. And that's, yeah, and Diego's actually already answered that question from that, because that was Maureen's question. In terms of Maureen's, I was really quite inspired by the simple use of tools in a structured way to achieve what I thought was actually quite a significant outcome, given the number of people that you're affecting with decarbonising heating across Scotland. I thought that was very clever, and in my mind, simplicity is best. So I was really quite inspired by that.
Ooh, thank you.
I noted Iggy had a couple of questions on the board as well. He went to the trouble of posting a couple.
Yeah, I do have. Yeah, I'm very curious about the public-private partnerships. It's a big topic, but I was just curious in this particular space and both topics. Can you guys share your experience in finding solutions or bringing stakeholders into the table that are private? And is this happening, or can it happen? I'm very curious about the process itself behind.
Cool. Maybe Maureen, we could start with you. You can just talk about public-private partnerships in your experience.
What do you mean by public-private partnership, Iggy?
Well, it's one of those broad questions that I'm curious about, and it's really it stems from me reading about the food waste index report, completely different topic, but one of the solutions there was to put more emphasis on public-private partnerships in measuring and applying systemic change to big problems. And you have decarbonization, and those boilers will be made by a company. And in a similar way, the rural transport will be provided by, some type of entity. Will it be a governmental entity or a private entity? I'm right now in Buenos Aires, and here the public transport is partly private, partly public. I was just curious, because I'm fascinated by the PPPs. I see a huge potential there, and I was just seeing this as an entry point for a lot of good work that can happen faster on a shorter time scale, especially considering systemic approach. And if it's not that clear, I'm really interested in identifying the process and the mode of operation, how you think about the role of private and the public in projects like this. Like, is it even present? or is it like an afterthought, or do I not know enough about the process itself?
I mean, in the particular case that I presented, it wasn't a very strong angle. I mean, the insights that we got from from the work were that a part of the challenge and part of the solutions will come from the private sector. If you think about just people who sell boilers and people who install them, for instance. I mean, if I really stay at the micro level there, the work enabled to really pinpoint some of the private stakeholders that would be key, in achieving net zero and in that space. It didn't tell much about what to do about that insight. That was not sufficient. More work would be necessary, I suppose. I mean, I have two thoughts about this, perhaps, to offer. I mean, I think there is a dependence on what sort of economic framing you live in. I mean, in the UK, it's the role of the market is the role of government is to act where the market cannot, right? There is a very strong it's an ideology there in a way, that at all costs, if the market can sort it, then don't interfere, and therefore it's a bit counterproductive for a partnership in a way. And then the levers will be incentives, and the incentives might be regulation, might be funding, might be so that's really always in the background. I feel like when done well, systems innovation approaches are all about bringing together all of the stakeholders and working it out. And I've not seen it done, and I would really welcome if there were some people on the call who have some example about that. But I've not seen it done necessarily in with public and private, like as in private as in commercial entities. I think I can think of some example I've come across where it's you have various stakeholder groups, can be lobbying groups or advocacy groups or various interest groups that can come together and sort of start negotiating and mapping and working together to achieve some solutions. Yeah, I'll just say there might be other thing. I don't know if it helps.
One follow-up question before you go to Diego. Sorry about that. Did you have the installers and the boiler people in the workshop?
No, we didn't have them. We had the we had professional institutions that represent expertise and so who are well aware of the constraints and the reality of those people, but we did not have the actual people. And this is where the kind of work that we did is got some limits, because it's it doesn't go out on the field. This one didn't.
Clear, thank you. Diego, on public-private partnerships, and you're on mute. So let's hear it from Big Bird.
I'm sparing you minion 3. Okay. So on public-private partnership, if anything, and this is something I'm quite involved in, is complexity thinking is giving us the case for the public sector to be involved where it's involved when markets seem to suggest that we should not be involved. Because one of the things that emerged, I mean, public-private partnerships is very good. It's an excellent tool when you have a market case. Because in a way, the public opens the door, it reduces the risk, the private comes in, and then it gets the return that it's supposed to have by delivering the service efficiently. But if you don't have the critical mass the window of opportunity or the context where you can have the case for the private, then you have to open the road no matter what with the public. And in some cases, because we have been so much under the, well, let me choose the word, under the imprint of the efficiency term-based approach on the public sector, we either make the case somehow in numbers or it doesn't seem to fly. And that's not the case. That's, for instance, nobody's going to build a road up in the to nowhere in Canada just on the pure basis of whether that road is efficient or that is cost effective. It's not. It will never be. But if you take into account other measures related and emerging from the issue of complexity, then you have a case based on the idea of equity. And so equity is important for the country, therefore you have to build a road. And these are the kind of things that we emerge. And let's take it out of the context in which you have an outlier, like rural mobility somewhere in the north. Take it down to locations where why we build a bigger school or a smaller school, why we build a road or a bridge in one part of town. Those, sorry, the word comes to me in French, the funiculaire, you know, those funiculars that bring transportation in certain parts of the city. Sometimes they get to be efficient, and the ones in Medellin and the ones in La Paz have been built on PPPs purely after the case was made and somebody actually put money on the public to make it happen the first time. Then they say, oh yeah, you can make money with this, and you have a public appeal, and then you actually made the case. And the other element on public-private partnerships is that you need to develop, if it's not developed already, a kind of hybrid ethics for that approach, public service ethics and public sector ethics. Because ethics in the public sector is about ensuring that we all get there, no matter what. Ethics in the private sector is about ensuring that you do things for profit in a good way, in a respectful way vis-a-vis society. Now that hybrid is, how can we connect the two? It's like when you do ethics of the nonprofit NGOs, they don't have the obligation to do it, but because they do it for the public, they take on a commitment and public trust is placed in their hands. That is a bit of a switch. And so public-private partnerships, yes, in the public sector, once, because the case is made or because we facilitate the case, and two, because the reason for doing it is suitable. In the case of Argentina, with water, in the case of Santiago, with transportation, it was a pure market-based approach. And that's what led to the instability that you currently overseeing over there. And I'm saying this as an international fellow scholar. I'm not saying anything in this regard as a public person from the public sector in Canada, but that is the case. You know, it has to be understood that it goes to different kind of frameworks. So much.
Nice, very good subject, Iggy. I think we should at some point maybe consider even doing a session on PPPs, to keep it short, on public-private partnerships, because I think systems thinking indeed is it's a very logical method to combine the two. So I have one hand for Mario, and I have Uganda, Katendi, if I say your name right, you're on the line. Would you be okay, Mario, to wait one moment? Because, I mean, yeah, I'd like to represent all the continents. So, Katendi, can you please introduce your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think I had two questions. The first one was usually when I deploy these methodologies and bring together public government institutions, I do realize that there's a lot of egoism and a lot of issues around people ring-fencing mandates and then using that as a cover for either wanting to think in terms of what everyone is doing and what all of them are trying to deliver, or to use it to try and stay in their silos. So
oh, you fell away, I'm afraid.
I wanted to find out from Mario, how did you deal with this? Is this something that happens? Because we're dealing with a bit of that in Uganda, and probably much of what in sub-Saharan Africa. Is it the same in Scotland? How did you deal with that when you did the first workshop?
Yes, it's you can never, I don't think you can never really remove that risk, and this, but by having really carefully and sort of orchestrated workshop where you really have it was very the structure of each workshop, what happens, what's the question, we really constrain the dialogue by having questions and performers to fill in, etc., which to some extent it forces people to stay within the bound of the question, not go off and take over the conversation. And there are also mechanisms of facilitation that you can use in order to enable everyone to speak and balance the voices in the room. So I think it comes mostly, in the sort of the facilitator and the design of the workshop to try and manage that. But that said, there's always a risk. I think you also can anticipate this by thinking about who do you need in the room. So at the design phase again, yeah.
Clear?
Okay, I've seen that sometimes you need everybody in the room, both good and bad, if I can use that. Sometimes you can't avoid, but you find that some agencies skew things, and when they're in the room, others perhaps do not want to express themselves that much, either because of clout or because of political influence or because they control the money. For example, if you have, I don't know what you call the taxman in other places. Here we call them the Uganda Revenue Authority. When they're in the room, everyone wants them to speak before they speak, and usually when they speak, everyone nods because they probably don't want to annoy the taxman or something, So so thank you very much. I picked a few things from what you said.
Very good. Yeah, I think managing people in workshops or these kind of collaborative processes is so hard. And personally, what I do is I get a lot of help from others who are, for instance, much closer to the people that I want in there, or who help me find the right people to in there and prep them. And also I prefer even sometimes have them do the pre and post calls to make sure that also the waves that might have been there during the workshop that will be leveled out. So a lot of massaging before and after. Oh, the Marine is not done.
Just a thought, and I'm thinking of another piece of work that we've done last year where we actually bypassed this by starting the work through individual interviews. So you go and talk with everyone and you give them that space where their ego is flattered because you're only there for them and you can capture everything. And again, you need to still think about how you frame the questions. And then you create an output from that, which, then can be taken to a group discussion perhaps, or at least can be shared. And it can be a way, it's obviously a different mechanics than doing a participatory workshop or intervention like that, but it can help bypassing that kind of issue if you're really concerned about what happens in the room.
Very good.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, again, also subject workshop mechanics. Great to talk about that. Love thinking about that as well. Now, Mariel, thank you very much for your patience.
I'm so patient. I've lost the thread. No, not really.
Sweden, what's your question?
Sweden, calling. 12 points. No, seriously. Obviously, as an economist, I look at this from a kind of an economic perspective. And, also connecting back to the question about public-private partnerships. I think you know, what we're seeing here is that we're quite good at using these kind of new approaches to assess the current situation. So the size of the problem, what the problems are. It's when we start kind of thinking about, you know, new ways of actually working differently and providing the right economic incentives that it becomes very difficult. Because I mean, the traditional kind of PPPs, you know, we've seen from lots of evaluations that, you know, you tend to basically boost in the return on investment calculations, you boost the benefits realization bit, and then when you evaluate 5 years down the line, you haven't been able to realize the benefits. So I think it can be a powerful tool, but I think it needs to be used differently, because if you think that what we're trying to do is to kind of move away from a reactive public sector that is kind of using regulation, incentives, all the kind of tools, taxation, in order to sort of adjust market failures in a kind of arm's length way, we're moving to a situation where you're kind of an active agent working alongside the private sector or the not-for-profit sector or citizens indeed, and you're trying to achieve things together. It's kind of a different public-private partnerships that you're looking at. And I think there are good examples where they've used these in different ways, particularly in crisis situations like the COVID pandemic, and developing vaccines and things like that, where, you know, yes, government was putting up money to develop vaccines, but also said, you know, if you get this money, we're going to have cheaper vaccines. So I think, you know, we are trying to do new things, but with the old tools still, and the frameworks, they're still old. And, you know, certain economic frameworks are so overruling of these kind of new ways of working that we actually need new economic frameworks. I'll stop there.
Very good. Well, we're about to also go to our next session, but I think Diego wants to add something else before we.
Yes, I would like to say something about the issue of financing. Is extremely important in many of these policy areas where the case is hard to make on the normal terms, because it's not that the case is not there, it's just that we don't have the tools, the frameworks, and the measurements to make the case. I refer, for instance, to finance for climate change in fragility context. If you want to have money to do energy transition or anything related to climate change situation in, say, Costa Rica, that's going to be an easy case, relatively speaking. It's going to happen, etc., etc. But you try to do that in a context in which you have fragility, low resilience, or you don't have the capacity, and it's very difficult to transform and to bring down that financing into those areas. It's one of the criticisms that's emerging out of the Green Environmental Fund, which big pile of money and everything. And it's not that the case is not there, it's just that we need to use these methodologies related to complexity and to network theory, because they're going to show you the case. They're going to show you that this makes sense. It's just that the thinking we have is too narrow and too Cartesian to actually prove it. And one of the areas I work a lot on right now is climate change and security. There was a paper on how to use financing to address things in conflict settings. But if you notice, every multilateral bank and every regional multilateral bank is developing specific measurements and ways of working in FCVs, fragile conflict violent context, because the thinking of a bank and the thinking of a funding does not work in a setting like that. So they need to create new measurements and new ways of doing it. But they're doing it trying to adapt the regulations onto the new case, not necessarily by digging into the case and being able to get the justifications that needs to happen. So this is something that will have to happen. It hasn't happened.
And that also links, Diego, just to follow on, I mean, it links to, trying to see if we're going to be more proactive and going to work much more with prevention, then we also need to think about the alternative cost of doing nothing. So, this is really valuing the socioeconomic impacts that will occur if we have business as usual, which we're not doing at the moment. So if we did that, then all of a sudden, as you say, we would have an economic case for action, because it costs something to not do things, which is not part of the framework. Shall we move on to the next part of the session?
I think you just bridged that very well, because I think you were doing a call to action already.
I did take charge here. So we're now in the call to action bit, everyone. And as you've seen, we've got some good advice here from Maureen and Diego. And I was hoping that some of you may have, on the basis of this discussion, have got some good advice to share as well. So if you go into the Miro board again, to the next session, next bit, which is called call to action. If you don't find it, raise your hand, give us a shout. I'm not sharing the screen because, then we hardly see each other. It's much nicer if you see each other. But I'd love for you to put in your pieces of advice here, or what you would like to share. So what publicly available tools, theory, approach would you recommend for introducing systems approaches in the public sector? So please write down on little notes here. I would personally recommend 3 Horizons. I think that's a good framework, talking about alternative futures that can help really shape discussions, especially if you're in a sort of beginning to talk about systems approaches and the fact that we have complex societal challenges at the moment. But I would also like to ask Diego and Maureen, you've given us some examples. Do you have any more up your sleeve that you could share with us?
Maureen, you want to go first?
Well, I did share the ones that we most use in our work. So, and I don't have a one go-to, any other go-to. I mean, I think my recommendation would be to be curious and just go read different things. And this is also a reason why I really appreciate this systems innovation community, so to speak, because it doesn't advocate for a single approach. It actually is open-minded to lots of different things. I think it's very contextual. So I hope that the improvement framework, which is the engineering better care, can be the one that I would recommend to start with. It is quite simple and comprehensive, but yeah, otherwise I would just rather recommend to look around and try different things.
Thank you. I've just put up a note here about the OECD that have an observatory for public sector innovation, OPSI. I can really recommend that. And I know they are in the process of updating their toolkits as well. Diego, did you want to add something here as well?
Yes, I really think that the whole framework of if I can call it peer pressure, basically the whole idea that good practices in one country can force or can push for the other in a different context. One of the things that emerged, and I remember from my trade policy courses back many years in the past, is that standardization is everything. And being able to push for standardization on one side goes to the other. Now, I see here the OCDE Kit Navigator and the OCDE work on public sector practices. That's great. But let's make sure that a bit of the thinking from this hub, Santa Fe Institute, and other folks that are working on complexity impregnates and it shapes the way we're doing public policy. And because this is not just a very nice process to adopt new ways of doing things. We don't have the time. We need adaptive, complex capacities to address climate change and infrastructure and everything else. This is a matter of emergency. So let's use those tools like OCDE and say, let's just change the way we do policy, because it needs to adapt very quickly to the new challenges, the polycrisis that some people call it that way. And so we're not that far from having conferences or discussions or multilateral engagements in which we compare notes and we say, let's just establish a way of doing it. Because if France does it, and Slovenia does it, and Germany does it, then the case is much easier to make in Canada and vice versa. Otherwise it's a bit of a struggle. But if we all push in the same direction, then the case is coming from the top and it's coming from the bottom, and then the change in approach is easy to implement. Sorry for the background.
Thank you. Well, that's really good advice from you guys. I mean, a lot of the times when we talk to the community about what you want to see, obviously a lot of people are just starting, and there's lots of hearts and minds to change, and it's great if countries, as you say, can take the lead, and there's always a bit of competition and they can learn from each other. But if we look at the next bit in this call for action, the next question, which is kind of what you would recommend as first step when applying systems innovation in the public sector, what would you say is kind of, and please feel free to add your examples in here. I mean, where do you start? What is the most important first step in your opinion? So please write your ideas here. Marine, do you have any, and also the rest of the participants here, what do you think is number one?
I think it depends what is your role or your your position or your area of influence, I suppose. But I think you can find your tribe. I think it's kind of good to always be curious and talk to people around you. There are more people that are actually quite interested than people think, and find the networks, find the people internally. If you're working in government, find the people who think like you, and but otherwise, in order to get started, I mean, for me, it's just start where you are, just start small, but just start.
Yeah, I can see that we have some good input here from you guys who are with us as well. So Iggy, you saying that it's important to get hyper precise on the focusing question to avoid too much complexity. Can you tell us?
It's a bit of a story. I was doing a research recently on the food system in the United States, and we interviewed 15 different stakeholders in the system, from small farmers to big compliance directors at big industrial companies. And having that body of knowledge, the body of research, I fell into a trap of trying to map the entire system, and then it was just an impossible task, because that system is connected to every other system. So as soon as I started to look at the food producers, the university part came in, the food processors, the retailers, it was just impossible. And I was not really equipped with the focusing question itself. And that was a very important aspect of establishing firm boundary, that it's not about mapping the system for the sake of mapping the system, because then I will sacrifice clarity in order to get the best possible picture. But what I'm really trying to find is actionable insight and this right information, not all information. So I think with public, it might be quite a similar challenge that it's really important, you know. On the meta level, it kind of works like a mental goal, that we are not here to get everything out there and like understand everything about everything, because it's impossible. It's just, how do we understand that one little specific thing, and how do we go about solving it?
That's really good insight. I always say to my colleagues and also clients, I work as a consultant, that you know, this kind of idea that we always have about, you know, what's in it for me? Can we plan our way all the way to the end? Can we plan everything before we start working? You know, that is actually, that's the most important thing to do away with, because we will never know. We will never be able to plan before we start and we learn. And this kind of experimental way of working, just getting the insight that it's okay to be unsure and live in uncertainty, is quite a big step forward. Otherwise, everyone sort of sits at the table and says, what's in it for me? Tell me what to do. I need certainty. And actually, they're not going to get it. You're not going to get systems innovation if you're going to have 100% certainty all the way. So that's an impossibility. Anyone else here who wants to share some thoughts on this? Martin, you are really burning the house down here with good.
Sorry.
things to say.
Always
what
too
are your
much
thoughts?
energy. Almost too much energy. I think my largest one is maybe the most useful. This is what I learned at the Social Security Bank, is that many people, maybe it's a combination, only think one-dimensional from their own perspective. And when on whatever you are working, it's so important to be, I call it inclusive. And inclusive means that if you look at the life cycle of whatever you are doing, from nothing to something to it's dead again, there's lots of people that are involved, lots of groups. So make sure that you have them in the room at some point, at the start, at certain intervals, at the right moment. And when you have that, and it takes a lot of work to do that, to get that time and space from the people and the okay. And then the next step, and that's a really hard one as well, is that you have to ensure that there's equality. I mean, we just heard from I forgot your name, from in Uganda, how difficult it is with all the egos and stuff. But if you get equality, then people will maybe even see each other, they can hear each other, and maybe even form a relationship. And that's when the real magic happens of what we are doing, I believe, in systems thinking, and that is with all these groups. So, and the key is, of course, not to call it systems thinking, but just doing it. Because if you appeal to, hey, but aren't we working for them? Why aren't they here? Yeah, I didn't have time, but why didn't you invite the pipe fitter? He's so important, isn't he? I'd love to hear him. And I understand if there are reasons not to do so, but try to do that. I think that's the key. Get the people in the room.
Great, thank you. So we're now going on to the last question in this bit, and then we're wrapping up. So given what you heard today, and this is a question to all of you really, what's the most useful, relevant advice or example that you heard today, and how do you think you would apply it in your own setting? I have to say, I've taken a lot of lessons from this. I love the toolkits. I'm gonna look through the toolkits that were recommended and hopefully be able to use them. Is there anyone here that would like to share some thoughts on the advice that you heard today? Please raise your hand or write on a post-it. Isaac, what's your takeaway?
I was really taken by, I think, one of Marian's comments, which was not getting caught up with the terminology, you know, not getting caught up with being pure, I suppose. That kind of runs, yeah, trying to be pure runs counter to some of the ideas of systems thinking, I guess. And it resonated with me because I've been guilty of it myself. I've failed to act because I thought it wasn't, you know, a pure systems approach, perhaps. So yeah, that's one thing that I've taken away, and then I will apply, is that it's more about taking that first step and learning, and then failing perhaps and trying again. rather than getting caught up in the pure methodology of it. Yeah.
And actually, I agree with you. It can be quite off-putting. So, you know, I work with lots of small municipalities in Sweden, and they are some of the most innovative public sector outfits because they have to, because they have small budgets, large distances, but they don't call it innovation. It's necessity. So, you know, if you
just do it.
if you talk about innovation, they get a bit put off. It sounds too grand. So, but actually they're super innovative. So, yeah. So what are you saying, Iggy? You're writing a note here.
Yeah, I'm just kind of recapping what Diego was talking about with PPPs, that it's really about understanding how, like on the timeline, how it counts when you have a market case, then you can look at PPPs and private fulfilling their role. But if there's no business market case, then the public comes in first, you know, opens the door, removes the risk, and that kind of opens the space itself for the private to fill in. And I'm really trying to apply that thinking and apply that knowledge to the food waste specifically, and trying to understand how would it be possible to identify opportunities for PPPs within the food waste, as this is one of the massive problems that we are facing, and how to mentally approach this problem. What comes first, and where do I put my energy, in what order? So I think that's how I would use the lessons from today to really understand that. Yeah.
Right. Marine, you're also
Fantastic.
saying something here.
And Diego, I think, has got his hand up too.
And Diego.
Yeah, I just put it on the post-it there. I really like Diego's reference earlier about the government index. I think all the question of what do you measure is what you get. I mean, government's decision making, investment, etc., even possibly, you know, how private organization entities will interact. They're driven by those measures, and if you shift the measures, then you potentially, you know, influence the whole system to sort of recalibrate. So really, it was quite thought-provoking. I don't know yet how I'm going to apply this in my work, but I'm just going to give it more thought. Thank you, Diego.
And Diego.
Diego.
Yes,
Anna.
well,
We have,
thanks to you and on that. And actually, no, I mean, once you have some ideas, let's explore and work it together. I wanted to say something about this issue of complexity, and it is true that even the terminology is a little bit off-putting. But if you remember, in the 1990s, early 90s, internet was green letters on black screens, and you needed to know what Gopher was and how to use modems. You need a lot of technical knowledge to get there. It's like, you know, the Matrix, right? You have to be able to read all those numbers.
Windsock.
Now, exactly, that kind of stuff. Today, the internet has a very useful interface, a user-friendly interface. And one of the things we should develop, perhaps that's for the to-do list, is a user-friendly interface for this approach. A user-friendly interface that not everybody's going to understand the complexities of complexity, the principles, the ideas. Not everybody knows what Santa Fe Institute is, but if we can translate it into this, because that's one of the challenges I have. My thinking on complexity as a social scientist is very much informed by what my friends are doing in physics and economic complexity. And these guys do formulas and stuff that I know that what they mean, but I could not do that. I don't have the skills and the capacity. Yet, what emerges from those operations and those equations is a great use as an insight, both on quantitative and qualitative terms for public policy. So how can we just come up with a halfway in which this whole user-friendly develops into a way of applying it to policy, and be able to have as well, without having the high level of complexity that comes from physics and the mathematicians that do complexity, something that gives us quantifiables. Because if we use this methodology, it's going to have to be It's going to have to be measurable somehow. But the way we measure things in public policy does not in any way compare to theoretical mathematics. Yet we're more or less talking about the same. So that interface needs to be developed, and it's a matter of figuring out exactly how many concepts we put into one single idea, or I don't know what else, something. But the interface is needed, and that will facilitate the use of these tools by public policy makers, decision makers, and public policy implementers. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. And
maybe-
that has to be the last word before we talk about in the next session, isn't it, Isaac?
That is, Marielle. Thank you. I was going to say, just quick, maybe AI is the catalyst to that interface. It takes the complexity and puts it behind into a black box for us. So it might be a tool for us to use in that space. But without further ado, I'm just going to quickly jump into the outro, as it were, because we do have 2 minutes exactly left. Wanted to thank you all for joining us in this session and promote the next session as well. The next session, we've got 2 more speakers coming up. We've got Alex Fleming from the Policy Lab in the UK and Mariana Mirabel from the OECD, providing some case studies on their work in this space on applying systems approaches in public sector environments. That'll be on the 16th of May, 12 p.m. Central European time. And you can click on the link to RSVP. I believe it even puts it into your own local time if you do it through your web browser. So also, if you want to join our hub, a couple of links down here, LinkedIn updates and so forth. We tend to market through the platform as well, promote our events through the SI Network platform, plus the LinkedIn channel or group. Little bit of feedback there if you feel you want to give us some advice on the next session as well. But lastly, can I just take this opportunity to thank our 2 panelists for joining us today. I know we've taken 2 hours out of the middle of your day or the morning, Diego, perhaps, and with sick children there in particular. We really appreciate all the time and effort you've put into joining us today. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you at the next session. Thanks all.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Great
Thank
discussion.
Thank you all, and
Thanks.
thank you for your patience with my kids. Cheers.
No
Bye for
problem.
It's the
now.
future.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
See you.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Nobody wants to leave.
Okay.
No, they're all hanging around. It's good.
Thank you.
No, it's really appreciate the input, Iggy. Yeah, it's having people engage is really valuable in these sessions. So yeah, thank you.
That's great. I mean, Martin, I'm just inspired by the amount of questions you had. Made me kind of want to ask questions. You're the
He does
first
it all the
person who
time.
just populated the entire board.
You don't want to know
That's
what's
how we
going
do
on
it.
in my head. Yeah. And now
He's a
realize,
star.
okay, yeah, my activity might actually stop the other ones too.
There's this one topic that I keep bumping into, this system visualization challenge. I think especially in a lot of different tools, that complex, that appeal of the systems is really problematic, because it's just impossible to understand sometimes what are we even looking at. And I think it kind of calls for a project in a way. And I just this meeting inspired me to think about that we have a group here that is really cares about that. What could it be like to prototype a tool, or even envision a tool that would help us visualize the system dynamics? And I'm specifically talking about, let's say, a map of stocks and flows, right? And then you have a lot of tools that right now at this point are either focused entirely on supply chains. So you have like AnyLogic or some kind of a tool that is specifically for a factory, and the images there are just kind of not really. We need a Miro or a Figma that is for systems, that is kind of helping us to kind of put things in a perspective of time too. So like behavior over time, because we have two different, like two major elements. We have loops, right? And then we have behavior over time, like how that loop over time works. And those two concepts are really hard to hold in the head at the same time. Like, and that's what I see a lot of opportunity. Maybe a collaborative workshop. I'll be happy to jump on this and like push this a little bit forward with you guys, but this is something we will have to do together, like a Kickstarter campaign.
I
Why
like
not?
it.
I think there's
Like,
an
how to move away
there's a
from
gap.
Gopher. Yeah.
Exactly, right? I mean,
it's a great idea. It really is.
It could be even as crazy as like trying to think about the visual reality or like augmented reality. Like we're still thinking in terms of like flat screens in that case, and then systems are like multi-dimensional.
Martin's well into his augmented reality. So
I had
He's
a
heavily
company
into it.
in that, so I have done lots of work in there. So no, great idea. It's also still processing, but I really like the metaphor also that overused is like, how do we make this the internet instead of hardware tools? And in a way, it's way, but I think there's even more elements.
Make it familiar.
But, and personally, I kept thinking about what Joss is doing with Innovations Network. I think that is an interface to the complexity of complexity. And his design principles that he applies, not the tooling. There you definitely have a point, but specifically to get people on board. Is cool.
I'm gonna have to bid you farewell. It's just gone midnight here for me, so
I know.
I'm gonna have to bid you farewell.
Respect, Isaac. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. No worries. Hope
Cheers.
to see you at the next one, Guy. Yeah.
Good to get to know you. Bye-bye.
Bye.